The mission of Halifax International Security Forum is to enhance strategic cooperation among democracies. To succeed in this mission, we need leaders with character, with values, who are willing to stand up for freedom, human dignity, justice, courage. No one exemplifies that more than John McCain. We are very proud that Senator John McCain has been a part of this forum since its beginning in 2009. And with that in mind, and knowing that we need strong leaders who exemplify these values at all times in human history, and certainly at this time in human history, Halifax International Security Forum has created a prize, the John McCain Prize for Courage in Public Service, that we hope will inspire other leaders from other countries, motivate people, stay focused. The first prize will be announced at the 2018 Halifax International Security Forum, and we look forward to Senator John McCain presenting that award. It's my privilege now to introduce my friend, my colleague, Ambassador Kurt Volker, and the president of the McCain Institute.
Well, Peter, thank you. It's an honor for me to be here, and let me start off just by saying that I'm not here presuming to speak for Senator McCain because, frankly, I don't think anybody can. He is such a unique person, both in our country and in the world. And I look around the room here, and I see so many people who have been touched by Senator McCain in the course of his career. Everyone, ministers, Senator Shaheen, if you're here, congressmen, military leaders, but also human rights activists, think tank people, and really across the world. I've had a chance to travel a lot in the last 6 months to various places, and there's not a single place I go where people knowing that I am representing the McCain Institute, named for Senator McCain, that they don't take time out to send best wishes to the senator and to tell a story about something that happened in their lives that connects them to Senator McCain. So it's really quite a phenomenal thing, the way he has had an impact on the United States and an impact on the world. And he continues to do so today. I don't think that there is another leader in our country who is having the impact and the importance of standing on core principles of our values and our democracy. And Peter listed them of freedom, justice, rule of law, human rights, human dignity, and that these are American values and these are universal values. Senator McCain had a chance to see this video, and he's very pleased to see this award being given, but let me explain why. Because what he wants to do is encourage that leadership, that commitment to core values and character, that courage among others in the world. He's not looking for something about himself. He's looking at something that can make a difference in the world going forward. That's why the McCain Institute was founded, to be a catalyst for promoting values-driven leadership. And a prize such as this from Halifax is very much in that spirit of recognizing others who are standing up to take their place. So with that, thank you, Peter, for this, and I look forward to working with you on this award.
Show this. And
this is the actual coin that
that will be awarded,
put together, which will be the prize awarded next year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's now my privilege. We don't do this often, but this is the first time that we've had the Chief of the Turkish Defense Staff with us, and it's a privilege to host you. We've talked a little bit about Turkey already, and without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce General Hulusi Akar, the Chief of the Defense Staff of Turkey, who will now address us. Thank you.
After the wonderful dinner yesterday evening, back to work. It was going to be a great dinner. It was going to be a great the support for all of us within our memory. Thank you. And we'll remember the Halifax always with lobster. Excellencies, ministers, generals, admirals, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I would like to extend my special thanks to Mr. Peter Van Prek, Mr. Harjit Sejan, Minister of Defense, and their teams for the kind invitation and the hosting the world-class event. Today, I will be sharing with you some of my views, thoughts on the changing security environment. In the last 25 years, as a result of the new actors, we started to witness a shift from a unipolar to multipolar situation. Additionally, technological development provided more devastating weapons for states as well as terrorist organizations, such as FETÖ, Fethullahçı Terrorist Organization, DAESH, PKK, PYD, YPG, Al-Qaeda, Nusra, and so on. In the security environment, some states resort to means other than conventional war, such as blunt, undeclared, proxy, and hybrid warfare. We may call this new security environment as Cold War 2.0 or post-Cold War era. In this new era, we need quantum leadership to creatively deal with the rapid change, uncertainty, and the decentralization. At this point, I have to tell you that using some terrorist organizations to eliminate other terrorist organizations or using them as proxies will lead to dangerous implications on the security environment. You may agree with me that the complexity of the security situation increased exponentially. There are so many challenges, crises, and conflicts, yet we hardly see any lasting settlements or agreements, and hardly any comprehensive solutions. Even reaching a good old modus vivendi has become harder. Increasing number of crises has led an arc of conflict and instability, placing Turkey at the very center. As we are in favor of the territorial integrity and political unity of our neighbors. Based on this background, let me share with you a brief security overview from the Turkish point of view, from the Turkish perspective. Putting aside other problematic issues, such as North Korea, he left, fragilities in the Balkans and the difficulties in Africa, to the east, Afghanistan still remains in a dire situation. Further to south, tension is on the rise in the Gulf. The situation in Yemen remains alarming. In the Mediterranean basin, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues. We should not forget the troubles in Libya as well. Prolonged conflicts and illegal occupations continue in Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. Crimea remains illegally annexed. These conflicts need to be resolved on the basis of the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Ukraine. In our immediate south, we are bearing the brunt of the daunting conflict in Syria and the turmoil in Iraq. Like doctor's description about the situation of a patient in the intensive care unit, the situation in the Middle East, serious and stable or unstable. The first thing we see in the Middle East is rampant instability and turmoil, which have led to the rise of groups with extremist, fundamentalist, and terrorist ideologies. In this respect, Daesh and the PKK-YPG continue to target our country and cause loss of innocent lives. Also, the scale and the scope of the crisis subject to be changing dramatically in the Middle East. The PKKPYD and YPG, which equals to each other, deserve special attention. It is listed as a terrorist organization by numerous countries and international organizations. Its Marxist-Leninist ideology and appeal for armed violence did not gain support among our citizens of Kurdish origin in any way. They may have different names, but they all have the same goal as proven with many concrete evidences and events. Turkish armed forces' effective operations eliminated PKK's activities to a large extent. Let me emphasize that in countering terrorism, we always take all the measures to protect the civilians. We have been warning about possible problems and conflicts in the post-Daesh era caused by forced demographic changes and disproportionate expansion of certain groups. Emboldened by its role in anti-Daesh operations, Barzani forced the 25th September referendum unilaterally. The referendum was not helpful for the unity of Iraq and the fight against terrorism. We must help increase the capacity of Iraq to fight against every kind of the violent extremist terrorist organizations such as Daesh and PKK and YPG. Ladies and gentlemen, as for Syria, the ongoing conflict has claimed the lives of more than 500,000 people. Turkey has played a vital role in hosting millions of refugees in its lands and expensed billions of US dollars. Thus, Turkey has avoided the refugee crises to spread into Europe and other parts of the world. Unfortunately, this humanitarian and admirable effort was not well appreciated by our allies. It was unfortunate to witness the utilization of terrorist organizations as proxies during this conflict. This has further complicated the situation. Some of our allies have been cooperating with PK affiliate YPG in a similar fashion. They have been supporting PKK-YPG in almost all domains, despite the news of acts amounting to war crimes. It was disappointing to see that some allies provided weapons and ammunition. I'd like to underline that PKK-YPG uses these weapons and ammunition against the Turkish citizens and the soldiers. Additionally, we are having a hard time to understand the ethics in fight against a terrorist organization with another one. It seems that a simple name change has been enough for some states. Even the hard facts are being overlooked. The celebration of YPG terrorists under the poster of their so-called leader Öcalan in Raqqa have some escaped their attention. They also disregarded the dirty deal YPG brokered with Daesh for evacuation of Daesh terrorists from Raqqa, even with their weapons. It is unbelievable. Distinguished guests, before moving to Daesh, I would like to particularly emphasize that any attempt to affiliate terrorism with any religion or ethnic group is utterly wrong and would in fact play into the hands of the terrorists. Daesh has nothing to do with Islam. Let us not forget that Daesh has also been attacking Islamic countries and killing innocent Muslims without any hesitation. Cynically, terrorist organizations are exploiting the term Islam, like other values. One has to be careful for not hurting the feelings of the millions of the innocent Muslims. Do not mix Muslims with terrorists. The key must be zero tolerance for terrorists. For instance, we have witnessed tragic attacks in Myanmar against Rohingya Muslims. The attackers were Buddhists. However, no one referred them as Buddhist terrorists. As for the situation on the ground, Daesh looks close to ultimate military defeat, but its ideology still looks firm. Military line of effort triggered movement of the foreign terrorist fighters to other conflict zones, third countries, as well as to their home countries. As for our measures, almost 20,000 foreign nationals were intercepted, deported, detained, and arrested, while more than 50,000 banned from entering Turkey. Turkey's participation in Operation Gallant Phoenix and effective intel sharing facilitated all these efforts. Daesh's divisive propaganda, together with differing agenda of various terrorist organizations used as proxies, is an indicator of many more crises to come. It is time that all actors on ground stop using terrorist organizations as proxies, which is detrimental to themselves, the region, and international community. A solution acceptable to all sides can be accomplished only if all actors abide by the rules of ethics. Turkey, together with the Russian Federation and Iran, has been implementing the measures agreed on during the Astana meetings. We have deployed troops in Idlib, which is one of the 4 de-escalation zones. Similarly, our efforts in the Operation Euphrates Shield area are focused on the normalization of life, the return of locals back to their homes, and establishment of the local administrations. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that NATO is one of the most effective and successful military organizations in the history. Recent developments indicate that the alliance has to switch its main effort to collective security concept. Cohesion and solidarity are more important than ever. Recently, in one of the NATO exercises, we had an unpleasant and unacceptable event, reportedly committed individually, maybe backed by FETÖ members. NATO authorities reacted timely and appropriately. We must not let anyone to undermine our alliance and solidarity. Taking this opportunity, once again, I'd like to thank NATO Secretary General and other authorities for their appropriate reactions. As for our contribution to NATO missions and activities, we have been protecting the eastern and southeastern flanks of the alliance. We are one of the top troop contributing countries and a framework nation in Afghanistan. We also take part in UN, EU, and OSCE missions. Turkey has participated in 13 international operations, such as KFOR and U4, in 11 different countries so far. Our total troop contribution to peace operations is over 50,000 troops. Distinguished guests, the last but not least important issue is the FETÖ terrorism. Just a year ago, FETÖ terrorist organization, disguised as a moderate religious movement, tried to topple the Turkish government through a heinous coup attempt. FETÖ members from different backgrounds participated in this treacherous act that claimed the lives of the 250 citizens and left more than 2,000 wounded. Fortunately, this coup attempt was defeated thanks to the supreme political leadership and the heroic acts of our people, side by side with the loyal soldiers and the law enforcement units. We know, unfortunately, many coups happened in this world, but a coup by terrorists infiltrating into the state and establishing an alternate state structure is quite rare. This might even be the first of its kind. This makes FETÖ the most cynical example of reinvented form of terrorism. We received staunch support from the international community, but some state and non-state actors still consider FETÖ as an innocent religious movement and even antidote for radicalism. This is absolutely wrong. Unfortunately, many FETÖ members have been granted asylum by our allies, and these FETÖ members continue their black propaganda and their lies from those countries. I hope they soon realize the real threat that FETÖ poses. Turkey condemns and actively fights against all forms of terrorism. In the fight against terrorism, we need to offer solutions rather than make up excuses. So I have to urge everyone that we should have a new thinking. My concrete recommendations in this regard will include development of a global roadmap that focuses on unity of effort and purpose to produce global solutions against terrorism. Full support to territorial integrity and political unity of every country. Full international cooperation in the fight against terrorism, including intel sharing. No discrimination among terrorists, and most importantly, not affiliating terrorism with any religion or ethnic group. Eliminating all kinds of financial resources of terrorists. Addressing on how to remove the root causes of terrorism and extremism. Preventing new conflicts, divisions, and wars while trying to resolve the existing ones with a comprehensive approach. Last but not least, as our president has stated, we should remember that the world is bigger than 5, referring to the United Nations Security Council. Along with other international organizations, United Nations Security Council should also fulfill its responsibilities in addressing the tragedies that affect the lives of millions. The priority must be the global safety and stability. In this regard, I would like to wish you all success on your discussions on Halifax International Security Forum. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we make this short transition.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Clemons with the Atlantic Magazine, and we're going to have some fun here this morning discussing a very serious subject. Of course, the nuclear weapon shadow was part of American culture, movies, national strategy. The Cold War helped define so much of world affairs and global affairs for so long. And then we went through a period, I think, of kind of amnesia, kind of getting away from nuclear. So I'm going to rename the title of the program today, Nukes, the Fire and the Fury, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. So let me introduce our panel. It's an extraordinary panel. We have Moshe Bogialon, former Minister of Defense of Israel, President of Manhigut, Acheret, and perhaps a future Prime Minister of Israel, but we'll leave that to him to sort out. General John Hyten, Commander of the U.S. Strategic Command. He is the global command and control of U.S. strategic forces. I ask him, what do you not do when you're not doing nuclear weapons? And he says, well, I do cyber war, electronic warfare, and everything in space. So I was asking really about hobbies, but he has a very, very extensive military portfolio. And we have Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, who is the visiting fellow at the Perry World House at the University of Pennsylvania and Brookings Institution. And she was the Department of State Coordinator of Threat Reduction Programs in the Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation at State. And we have Sung-Han Kim, who's a Dean and Professor at the Graduate School of International Studies and Director of the Ilmin International Relations Institute at Korea University. And he was the former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, of course, for the Republic of Korea. So thank you all for being here. Let me start with you, General, and ask you about my pop culture reference with Dr. Strangelove, and ask you how many times you've seen it.
So I've seen Dr. Strangelove less than half a dozen times. I don't know the total. It's probably been 10 years since I've seen it. I certainly remember it. I also remember the movie Failsafe. That's an interesting movie too, especially the way that it ends. You have to try to figure out what you think the future is going to be. So I ask you, as you watch those movies, and you watch the movie there with the music over the top. I didn't like the music over the top, to be honest with you.
But because of the seriousness of the
Because of the seriousness of this is a very serious subject, and the world is a very dangerous place right now. And it's important that we look at the world the way it exists, look at the adversaries that we face, and my command only has 3 priorities. Number 1, we'll provide strategic deterrence above all else. Number 2, if a deterrence fails, we'll have a decisive response, and we'll be combat ready to do it all the time. And that's a very serious mission. and we have to understand and be ready all the time. And that's what we focus on. So it's nice to kind of step back and look at Dr. Strangelove and look at all those pieces. And we actually use way too many Dr. Strangelove quotes in the command because that's part of the culture. But it's also a culture that many people in the world have forgotten.
That's my big question, because I know that you've given your life to this field and profession, and you have extraordinary responsibilities. For those who don't know, if President Trump decided to launch nuclear weapons, General Hyten will be the last person he speaks to or interacts with before that happens. So you have an extraordinary responsibility, not only in command of the forces, but also in that interaction with the President of the United States, who has the nuclear codes. And my reference to the pop culture was not meant to be facetious, because one wonders, when we were looking at Nunn-Lugar, there was a sense of kind of rolling back the sense that nuclear weapons matter. And Bonnie, I want to bring you in on this too, because I just screened a movie that you'll be able to see in January or February called The Final Year. And it focuses on Barack Obama's last efforts in foreign policy before the change in leadership. And it really highlights Susan Rice, Ben Rhodes, Samantha Power, and John Kerry, and all the things they were trying to do. What's interesting is I sat on the edge of 4 nuclear security summits, which the Obama did. It doesn't appear in the movie. So if, even with the champions in a vanity film about the Obama administration's foreign policy efforts, if they themselves aren't putting their nuclear security summits that brought world leaders together high on their priorities of achievements and accomplishments, why should we be taking it seriously? You were the point person.
Well, I'm a little surprised that it wasn't listed as one of the achievements, because there was a lot of attention and effort that was put into trying to help countries why they understand why they need to secure nuclear material. There was a lot of interest in that, and I recognize that when we actually did the summits, there were 4 summits that we did between 2010 and 2016. We were competing with other issues that were always taking place at each summit that we had. For example, in the summit that we had in The Hague in 2014, Russia's invasion in Ukraine took the priority. So there often are other issues that seem more sexy, often other issues that the media want to pick up. But there was a lot of interest and concern in making sure that countries understood the importance of nuclear terrorism. So I'm a little surprised it wasn't in the film, because that was certainly something that...
But it's a benchmark of disinterest. It's sort of an important issue, as General Hyten just said, but it's a benchmark of an important issue, perhaps neglected or shoved in the corner. And so, General, when you think about deterrence today, and you've got to have people inculcated sort of with the strategic sensibilities of this, is that a problem? Is deterrence today in doubt? Is it something you think about? Are we not training leaders well enough to know about the strategic equities we have?
So when I look at deterrence, the fundamentals of deterrence from Schelling and Kahn are still the same. It's 3 elements: to deny benefit to an adversary, to impose cost on an adversary, and make sure it's credible and communicated effectively to the adversary. And I think that we are stepping forward in doing that, but I'm not sure we understand the full means of what deterrence means in the 21st century. Because somehow we've gotten to the point where people think that under the New START Treaty we have 1,550 deployed nuclear weapons, the Russians have 1,550 deployed nuclear weapons, and somehow that will deter all our adversaries. That's deterrence. That's not deterrence in the 21st century. That's a Cold War mindset of deterrence. Deterrence today has to involve, yes, it starts with the nuclear weapons, but it also considers deterring catastrophic activities in space, in cyberspace. It involves the conventional elements. It involves all the instruments of national powers and allies working together in order to deter our adversaries from behavior that we don't want. And we don't think effectively about that broader deterrence construct very much. And so when you actually go back to Kahn and you go back to Schelling, and you don't think about this new. So we've put together an academic alliance where we're trying to get the academic community and the think tanks again to start thinking about what deterrence is in the 21st century, because it is very different. The nuclear piece is still a piece of it, but it's much broader.
Moshe, I want to ask you about what we're seeing today in the world, because a lot of reason that nukes are back as a topic is what we're seeing play out with North Korea, the negotiations and Iran nuclear deal. Nuclear weapons are back as a big clarifying subject of focus of strategists again. And as small countries like North Korea and others pursue nuclear weapons programs, what insights do you have about small countries pursuing nuclear weapons?
It seems that the Middle East is far away from North Korea, but there are many implications and there is an impact of the ongoing conflict with North Korea to what is going on in the Middle East, especially as regard to Iran. And the difference between Iran and the Iranian regime and the North Korean regime is the North Korean regime keeps their weapons, and they have already the weapons, in order to defend themselves, in order to blackmail the United States, other parties in the region, but they don't have any aspirations to export revolution, the communism or whatever outside of the country. The Iranian idea is to have the weapon, first of all, to defend themselves, to be immune from any attack, but to use it as an umbrella to be able to intensify their activities to gain hegemony in the region. So far, they do it without the nuclear weapons. We believe that with a nuclear weapon, they'll be more dangerous to the region. That's why we claim, and this is our policy, that by one way or another, the military nuclear project in Iran should be stopped. And so far, to try to stop it by pressure, by diplomacy, but to be ready for the day to come to stop it anyhow by any means.
Let me dig just a little bit deeper. How do I put this diplomatically? A lot of folks think, Israel, of course, has about 200 nuclear warheads, so that you're already over that line. My question to you is, if that were the case, why isn't deterrence working in your theater? Has that helped you achieve anything? If you have to engage in potential conventional conflict to stop other potential nuclear aspirations in other countries, what do those nuclear weapons buy you? And I want to come to Sung-Han Kim because it raises the interesting other question of why doesn't South Korea, particularly if it has worries about its future and the solvency of the American nuclear umbrella, why doesn't it just develop nuclear weapons?
There are rumors that Israel has certain capabilities. And if this is the case, we prove to be rational, responsible governments for years. And actually, I believe that because of this perception in the region, we were not attacked by weapons of mass destruction. Egypt used chemical weapons again in Yemen in '62. In '67, when they were defeated on the conventional battlefield, the first option is to use chemical weapons against us. They didn't dare to use it because they believe that we have certain capabilities. Saddam Hussein used the chemical weapons against the Kurds in Halabja. In '91, he launched missile toward Israel. He didn't dare to use chemical weapons. And Bashar al-Assad as well. So in our tough neighborhood, the perception that we have certain capabilities is very important to deter them from using weapons of mass destruction against us.
So Sung-Han Kim, why doesn't South Korea move more expeditiously towards the possession of certain capabilities?
Because we are responsible member state of the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is one of the key pillars of the post-Cold War international order. For the past 25 years, we have been trying to stop North Korea's nuclear pursuit for their own strategic purposes. But until now, we haven't come up with any kind of a solution. So we, in 1991, signed on so-called denuclearization declaration on the Korean Peninsula. So we have been trying to keep the promise, stick to that kind of a declaration. But North Korea has violated the declaration by pursuing nuclear weapons. If you look at North Korean kind of territory, they have already deployed almost 1,000 short-range ballistic missiles. They are now on the verge of succeeding the development of nuclear ICBM capability that can destroy the mainland of the United States. This is not just a threat to the national security of the United States, but the alliance system of the United States, which means U.S. key allies such as Republic of Korea and Japan do not fully trust nuclear umbrella provided by the United States once the U.S. mainland will be threatened by North Korea's ICBM. So for now, we are relying on so-called extended deterrence or nuclear umbrella provided by the United States. But we have to think about Plan B, which means we need to come up with some other alternatives when we all agree on the fact that our diplomatic efforts have been a failure. We can explore three options. The completion of nuclear fuel cycle while relying on US-provided nuclear umbrella, or redeployment of US nuclear tactical weapons back to South Korea, as we had during the Cold War days. Third option is for South Korea to go nuclear. So we can probably think of three options in the future as a plan B. But for now, we are making almost effort.
General, would you advocate deploying tactical nukes back into South Korea?
I do not. That was a question for me?
Yeah.
So I do not, and I just went to Korea about 6 weeks ago. I met with General Jung, Minister Sung. I got to meet President Kim. The reason I went was to guarantee that the deterrent capabilities that this nation provides, that my nation provides, is there for that part of the world. I think the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is an important element of the structure, and that requires the United States to provide an extended deterrence for a number of our allies, and we do that. And I want to make sure that that is understood by our allies, because I think that is the best posture, because in my opinion, the more nuclear weapons we have in the world, the less secure the world is.
So let me ask you all a question. The reason why this session is so important, I think, and consequential, and we're going to get to all of you soon, is that I don't think anyone believes that North Korea, under any circumstances other than forced or shoved, will denuclearize. Right? I just don't believe that. Maybe I'll ask, does anybody believe that North Korea will kind of take Donald Trump's message and capitulate and give up its nuclear weapons? Please share your hand. There's one out here. Yeah, so I'm going to come back to you later. And so if you're not in that, and you've got North Korea essentially survives somewhat through extortion, behaves badly in the world and gets paid off not to behave badly, and then goes through another cycle. And now, as Sung-Han Kim just said, has reached a technical competence in miniaturization of warheads and the delivery of those systems that no longer can be ignored in any way. And so we're at a point where we say, what to do? This is why we're having this discussion. And so I guess I would like to ask all of you, I hear about sanctions. I mean, North Korea is a $40 billion economy. It survives through prostitution, drug dealing. It's basically a big narco gang country, in my view. And so in that, some of our discussion seems so irrelevant to the realities of curtailing North Korea. And it has taken us in this box that the President of the United States has said we need to do something different. H.R. McMaster has said we need to do something different, that the time for talks and appeasement are over. And Dr. Kim, I know that you worry about this, and so this seems like a different time. Are you ready for war?
Not really. I think still we need to explore diplomatic solutions. Because
what does that mean, really? Is it appeasement?
Not appeasement. This is bringing North Korea back to the negotiating table through what President Trump said, through maximum pressure. Quite frankly, for the past 25 years, we didn't have a chance to implement real sanctions. But after North Korea conducted the sixth nuclear test, I think we came up with some package of real sanctions, even though it is not quite sufficient. China is making effort, if not almost. For example, North Korea, the state companies, they went into northeastern part of China and created kind of a pseudo-Chinese companies who are working on behalf of North Korean regime, importing Swiss cheese from Switzerland or luxury goods, Mercedes-Benz, and also importing some goods for the missile parts or nuclear weapons. We need to punish them. We need to target them. And also, China has agreed to put some limit on the import and export of key export items of North Korea. So we have discovered some fatal spots of North Korea. So I think we need to explore these efforts with the help of China. Then probably this is not for the sake of bringing down or taking down the North Korean regime. We need to bring them to the negotiating table for denuclearization.
Moshe, I want you to critique what Dr. Kim just said. Is that enough in your experience in war and peace? If you were, let's just make you the president of South Korea, what actions would you be taking that they're not, from an Israeli frame that you would be taking with North Korea that's not happening? Presuming you hadn't already bombed them.
We have a saying in Hebrew, in order to have peace, you should be ready for war. And in order really to deter your enemies, you should demonstrate determination, political stomach, whatever, in order to be ready for a war. What we have seen now regarding North Korea, as you know, is watching from the side, irrational player in North Korea. And exchange of irrational words from the American side, which I believe plays a
The old and the
role.
short and the fat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, and it might be that with what we witness now, the silence on behalf of North Korea is a result of the fear. If you have irrational player, you should demonstrate irrationality. Yes, I'm ready to go all the way in order to deter him. And that I believe this is the case. But really, you can't say that I'm not ready for a war when the other side is ready to go all the way.
Bonnie, what would you do if you were in charge of South Korea?
Well, I agree with the process of trying to use sanctions. I think we have to do what we can to get them.
What is sanctions? I mean, it's got to be the most sanctioned country in the world. I mean,
It
it just
is.
seems like a ridiculous discussion.
It is in a sense, and actually right now this seems to be the only thing that we have available. But
So if the only thing that is available has shown itself to be completely ineffective for decades,
we need to start trying to think of new things, think of new ways of approaching the situation.
any idea on what those new things and new ways might be?
Well, one of the things that I wrote about was how do we bring in other, and I know that the region really wants to work with countries within the region, but I think we need to consider how do we bring in other discussions, how do we bring in other partners into this very old effort to try to prevent North Korea from doing certain things, which obviously we failed with nuclear weapons. I think we have learned some lessons in the way in which we've approached Iran. I know that there's been some discussions about how successful that's been, but for the most part, we have no reason to assume from what we're hearing about from IAEA and from our U.S. intelligence that there's a reason to be concerned about Iran right now and violating that agreement. So in my sense, I think we've learned something from the way in which approach Iran.
Isn't the U.S. sort of violating that agreement?
The U.S. is violating,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, we have other partners who are part of that agreement. And I think that we should stand firm with that agreement.
Right.
But I think there's lessons learned that we've learned. There's lessons learned from that situation that maybe we can apply here in Korea. Only in the sense of ways in which we can negotiate and ways in which we can approach the situation that maybe bring in other partners. Maybe there's room to bring in countries outside the region. And I see you shaking your head. So I know it's new, different thinking. But I think we're at the point that maybe we should be a little more open to other options. So.
General, I want to wrap this up with you and then go to the audience. I'm interested in this question of just the soundness of our strategic arsenal and how we were just talking about Cheyenne Mountain, the extraordinary fact that Mike Allen of Axios just sent an email out with his daily brief. It focused on Cheyenne Mountain. What would an attack on North Korea look like? Where would it happen? And you told me that you used to work in Cheyenne Mountain. It used to be a pretty crappy place. And so I'm interested in this question of where we are in terms of the solvency of our nuclear arsenal and that being communicated as a deterrent. Because everyone I know tells me our systems are basically not necessarily modern, that we have a lot of gaps in the system. We're thinking of spending about $1.7 trillion over 30 years. And so when you're out there basically trying to send a message to adversaries, watch out, we're the slickest band in town when it comes to the possible deployment of nuclear assets. How safe is our system? How modern is our system? What do you worry about?
So it's safe, secure, reliable, ready today. We exercise it every day. It's not modern. I have no concerns about the capabilities of the system today or the next few years, but I am concerned about the capabilities in the late 20s, early 30s, because the Minuteman ICBM is a 3-stage ICBM, solid rocket ICBM. Eventually, it has to be replaced. Submarines can be built for an amazing capabilities, but at some point in time, they don't go under the water anymore just because they've been under the water so many times. We're coming to the end of life of a lot of our critical capabilities, and we have to modernize. It's interesting you talked about President Obama. The Obama administration, I think if you read the speech in Prague in 2009, it's an amazing speech about a nuclear-free world. I don't think we'll ever get to nuclear-free world myself, but it's an amazing speech to read. But it's also President Obama that in the last 2 years of administration made a commitment to modernize the entire nuclear triad again, to modernize the ICBM, the bomber, the submarine, the cruise missile, the nuclear command and control, and the weapons. Why did he make that decision? And why is it being supported by the current administration? It's because the threats in the world require that. And if the threats in the world require that, we're going to modernize it again. But if you walk into my command center and you sit down and you watch, and Secretary Mattis was out at the end of September, and it was the last launch of the long-range missile from Korea happened while I happened to be in our headquarters. And he walked down with me and he sat right next to me as we processed the entire event. And he looked at me and he said, "You have exquisite situational awareness of everything that happens here." Because I actually watched the missile take off, fly, impact. I can see it all from my command center. I can provide the right recommendations of what to do. But his direction to me, and the President's direction to me, is to create the conditions for diplomacy to work by being ready all the time. And we are ready every minute of every day to respond to any event that comes out of North Korea. That's the element of deterrence that has to be clear. And it is clear. If he goes down that path, it will not end well. But my goal is to create the room for diplomacy and sanctions to work. And the only reason I didn't raise my hand on your question a while ago was because you asked the question wrong. President Trump by himself can't change the behavior of Kim Jong-un. But President Trump can create the conditions that the international community can reach out in different ways, where we can work with the Republic of Korea, where we work with our neighbors in the region. We can work with China, we can work with others to try to find a solution to that. So we're going to keep every bit of pressure that we can on it, and we are ready to respond right now at this moment.
The other day I watched your predecessor, Robert Keller, speak in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about this incredible responsibility that you now have in that conversation with the president before nuclear things. And he said, that he implied he could push back. Have you thought about that conversation you might have with the president in this sort of scenario?
I have, and we talk about it. I think some people think we're stupid. We're not stupid people. We think about these things a lot. When you have this responsibility, how do you not think about it? And so, but what people forget is this is a military mission and a military function. And since the day I joined the service 36 years ago, every year I get trained in the law of armed conflict. And the law of armed conflict has certain principles. Necessity, distinction, proportionality, unnecessary suffering, all those things are defined. And we get, for 20 years it was the William Calley-Mealy thing that we were trained on, because If you execute an unlawful order, you will go to jail. You could go to jail for the rest of your life. It applies to nuclear weapons, it applies to small arms, it applies to small unit tactics, it applies to everything. And we apply it as we go through it. It's not that difficult. And the way the process works, if you want to get into the details later, I'll go into the details later. The way the process works is it's simple. I provide advice to the president, he'll tell me what to do, and if it's illegal, guess what's going to happen?
You say no.
I'm going to say, Mr. President, that's illegal. And guess what he's going to do? He's going to say, what would be legal? And we'll come up with options of a mix of capabilities to respond to whatever the situation is. And that's the way it works. It's not that complicated.
But I think it's an interesting story that not many people in the world, nor Americans, hear. And so it's interesting to actually be walked through the process as they did with these very key decisions. In fact, because I think we have had a period of amnesia about what nuclear weapons in the world means and how to handle them. Bonnie?
Sorry to jump in because I know you asked for us to
Yeah.
jump in. I just wanted to highlight the point that you made about creating the right environment. Because clearly the environment right now is not one where you can have diplomacy. So you need to really, ratchet down the rhetoric and create an environment where we can have these discussions and we can bring in these other partners who can actually play a role in this. So.
Right. Thank you. Peter McKay.
And welcome all. Wonderful to have you home in Halifax. This is a city that has experienced not a nuclear explosion, but up until Hiroshima, the largest man-made explosion. Within eyesight of this hotel, a munition ship collided in the harbor. Thousands of casualties, thousands of deaths. America came to our aid, and we've been grateful, of course, ever since. My question to the panel, and our Turkish general, Akar, referenced the fact that terrorist elements, we focus a lot on ISIL and Daesh, but we haven't had as much discussion of late, naturally because of North Korea and the ongoing menace of Iran, but about rogue elements, non-state actors coming into possession of nuclear weapons, nuclear capacity, not necessarily a bomb, a dirty bomb on a ship, on a container ship. So my question is your view on that possibility, I don't want to say inevitability, and General Hyten, to you directly, since we're in Canada, one of the discussions that has been revived here is about a northern warning, working in cooperation with NORAD, Canada upping its game, its contribution. I'd like to see as part of the six-party talks as well, but let's focus on what we can do practically as a deterrent for North America. Should we be doing more through NORAD? This is something that we've long debated, something I think that's, like your systems, has to be updated. The Arctic, if a strike is to come to North America, it's very likely to come over our airspace, over the Arctic.
Thank you. Moshe, the first one, rogue elements.
Thank you, Peter, for the question. I don't know about any terror organization which is able to produce a bomb. It had become a big issue after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we had certain channels in which intelligence communities had to deal with it. So far, so good. We are afraid in Israel that if Iran become military nuclear, they provide such a device to any terror organization to use it against us.
John?
So the threats we look at across the world, we kind of categorize it to a phrase called 4+1, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, plus violent extremism. We have to look at those potential threats across the entire spectrum, including weapons of mass destruction, which includes a lot more than nuclear, but we have to look at the nuclear piece as well. My command used to have the responsibility for looking at countering weapons of mass destruction. That's now been transitioned into Special Operations Command. The Special Forces guys actually have some very unique capabilities. If we do discover something like that, to figure out how to go in, find it, secure it, and move on. That's why we adjusted it. But we still focus on that capability. We watch for it very closely. We defend our assets, we defend our nuclear materials, and we watch very closely what happens around the world because we can't allow that kind of expansion, proliferation to happen into the +1 element of our strategy.
I think nuclear security command, security summit should continue in that sense.
Good luck with that.
I think that was really a genuine, decent effort to think about nuclear security. We have been focusing on some rogue states, but since September 11th terrorist attack,
Right.
non-state actors, if the WMD are put into the hands of those terrorists, they are willing to die. The rationality is unworkable for them. So the conventional deterrence kind of a calculus is not to be applied to those terrorists. So in that sense, I think how to manage nuclear materials or all kind of things that we agreed upon should be followed up with kind of updated kind of a cooperative measures. So in that sense, I think this kind of effort should continue.
Bonnie, you want to?
Yes, just wanted to briefly, and you kind of started out where I was going to, what I was going to talk about, which is there's two things. One is the Nuclear Security Summit, which is, as we said, happened 4 times during the Obama administration. And a lot of work that went on with that was to target exactly what you're talking about, which is a concern about non-state actors. And it was the focus of the summits was to prevent non-state actors from getting their hands on nuclear material and radiological sources as well, to take care of the dirty bomb. So whether there's any more nuclear security summits in the future, what's important is states they continue to implement the commitments that they made through the nuclear security process, through the communiques, through the action plans. There's a lot of agreements that were made, and it's important that countries continue to abide by the agreements that were made during the process. Secondly, one of the major things I did in the government was focusing on this very issue. My portfolio was coordinator of threat reduction programs, which are programs that you're talking about to prevent non-state actors from getting their hands on weapons of mass destruction. And there's a lot of activity that's going on in the U.S., around the world with other countries on that specific issue to prevent that from happening. So it is a big issue, even though we haven't really talked a lot about it. It does get a lot of attention and resources.
Thank you, Jane. Well, I promise to get to as many people as we can. And we'll lightning round. So, Jane.
Yeah, your moderation of this panel is absolutely superb. And General Hyten, I'm comforted that you're the last phone call Donald Trump will make before he makes his final decision on what to do. You're the one who raised that we're not just talking about nukes anymore. We're talking about other catastrophic weapons, including cyber, and I think that's fascinating. My question is not about that, although I think it's fascinating, is about the comment that Bonnie made, that we maybe need to expand the group that is putting pressure on North Korea. Who else could play in a big way? Russia? NATO? Any other folks represented here?
Well, when the reference I made to the Iran agreement was really about, Germany and France were obviously involved in that, so they have experience in working on these type of issues. So I would include Germany, I would include France, I would include some international organizations. The IAEA should be not so much putting pressure, but obviously playing the role that they would play in making sure that countries are either abiding by commitments that relate to nuclear weapons issues. So I would certainly have those two, and then I would be open to others. But I think the important thing is that we take advantage of what we've learned and I think we need to start thinking differently. And we need to start thinking, sometimes you think differently by bringing different people to the table, and you can develop different strategies. I think we can't lose anything if we try that.
If I may, because this is something, James Stavridis, who's not here, has advocated a naval blockade. But, the notion isn't just a blockade. The question is, if North Korea essentially survives through illicit trade, smuggling, the movement of cash through connexes of things, we're talking about banks and formal facilities. And I just want to put that on the table, that we may need to change the way we think what the pressure points are in putting North Korea, and I don't think we are. And that's why when I'm commenting on MSNBC and someone talks about another round of sanctions, I almost want to jump out of my seat, because that's not how North Korea survives. Those aren't the pressure points, but thank you. Yes, sir, you said North Korea is going to give up nuclear weapons on its own. So tell us who you are, and just give me like 5 seconds on why you think that's going to happen.
Okay. My name is Yamaguchi from Japan, Lieutenant General retired. I think we don't have to give it up. That's it. And we need to get back to the basic. North Korea should abandon nuclear and missile program, complete in a manner of complete, verifiable and irreversible. That is a consensus among the world, the rest of the world. So we need to pursue that. In order for that, we may have a number of different options, including military options, from the flexible deterrent options to actual use of weapons. It may be including some condition which we might call war, but our goal is to erase possible new nuclear comers to the world. Otherwise, if we admit this condition, we are watching a world where everybody, even small malicious country, if they have ICBM and nuclear warhead, they can be equal to the United States. That's what we need to avoid.
So just to clarify, when you raised your hand before, you were not saying that North Korea would self-select to denuclearize. It needs to be forced or compelled.
We can make the condition under which Kim Jong-un is forced to abandon his idea.
Okay, so you're not the outlier I thought you were. Joe Jaffe.
Thank you. Two questions. One, this mysterious expansion of relevant powers in the game to the ambassador. I don't quite understand how bringing in France or Germany, or maybe even the great state of Italy, will be more productive than the United States and the two other big players, although they're not formally so, Russia and China. The other question is addressed to Dr. Kim. You went through the three options, and two of them are pretty tough. Tactical nuclear weapons, so going nuclear. I don't see how that is even remotely part of the South Korean universe, which has played a very ambivalent game.
Yeah, have you talked to Moon Jae-in?
And very ambivalent. I mean, they were even hesitant to deploy anti-missile systems, and they're always oscillating between sunshine policy and talking tough. I mean, how do you conceive of your country going through either of those two tough options?
Great question. I'm going to start with Dr. Kim.
That's a very good question, even though I'm going to be having some difficulty in answering that question. Ambivalence. That's because of so-called South-South conflict within my country. Some liberal forces who try to engage North Korea on the one hand, and the conservative forces who try to teach lessons to North Korea. So this kind of ideological struggles have been going on for the last 25 years. So that's one thing. And another thing is our relationship with China. ROK-China trade volume is larger than ROK-US plus ROK-Japan combined, which means we are heavily dependent on China economically. That's why China is trying to take advantage of this economic card, for their own strategic purposes, which has exposed South Korea to many kinds of pressure, even when we decided to deploy THAAD system just against possible threats by North Korea. But as I mentioned last night, China is always looking at North Korea through the lens of US-China strategic competition, which means North Korean issue is not to be isolated from other strategic issues such as Taiwan or East China Sea or South China Sea problems. This means, as Dr. Henry Kissinger pointed out in August Wall Street Journal article, kind of a common understanding between US and China would be a kind of a prerequisite for the solution of this problem, which means these two big players need to talk to each other.
But let me ask you,
South Korea is
let me just pursue
between.
that for a minute, and Bonnie, I want you to come in very quickly, and there's a zillion questions out here, and I'm going to be hated by everyone because we're not going to be able to get to all of them. But on the China-Russia question, we came to a common understanding with China and Russia on Iran. So we went through an exercise on the Iran deal. China and Russia were strongly supportive. In fact, Russia was really vital in very, very key ways. And so when Joe asks about a roster of potential unnecessary allies, which you said are unnecessary, how do you actually go through another process with Russia and China on a nuclear challenge after basically kicking the heck out of the Iran deal? So I'm going to piggyback. But Bonnie, can you respond to Joe?
Well, I think before we have any other countries part of the discussion, you of course have to talk with the countries who are in the region. So, you know, I'm not assuming that we just have everybody get together all of a sudden. There have to be discussions that lead up to it. Is there a guarantee that if you add more countries, it'll make a difference? We don't know, but we haven't, I mean, we know what we know, which is that we're at a stalemate right now. We know that the environment has changed. We know that it's maybe an opportunity to see what advantages we can add by bringing in some countries who have been part of some of these other discussions, like Iran. Would they be willing to come back in for another debate? That's something that we can also pursue. But I think the other thing is also to think about the fact that looking at the region, and a North Korean nuclear weapon affects, it's a global issue. And I understand that it affects the region most predominantly. But there's a question about whether other countries may want to have more of a say in it. And I think we haven't explored that yet.
Thank you. So we're going to do some lightning round here to get a lot more voices in. And so 30 seconds, sir. Oh, Dove, how did you get the mic? Go ahead.
Well,
yeah.
you asked me for it.
Go ahead, Dov Zakheim.
Not only that, you told me to ask a question.
Exactly.
So I'd like to pick up on the China point again, because quite frankly, the difference between Iran and China is everybody wanted to do Iran and North Korea rather. Everybody wanted to do business with Iran.
Right.
And that was a huge incentive for everybody jumping in. It's not the case with North Korea. And so I think it's correct that it really is between us and China. And my question, therefore, is, with the president just having been there and having made nice to Mr. Xi and Mr. Xi making nice to the president and nothing coming out of it, what exactly should we do with China more than we're already doing to get them to actually
Great
do
question.
something?
Let's take this gentleman here I was trying to get to, right to your left, yeah.
1983.
Who are you?
Sorry, my name is Paul Dewar, I'm former member of parliament here in Canada. 1983, Stanislav Petrov, the Soviet military person responsible for the nuclear launch, will all recall, forgotten in his own home when he died recently, was given an order to launch. And he didn't, and it's a good thing. And remember, this was just after the shooting down of a Korean jet. And I'm asking the question in that my question in this context. I'm very concerned about the communication between powers at this point. I think it's deteriorated. We had open communications with the P5 through that. To the general, do we still have those communications? And are we on top of that file to make sure that we don't have an accident? And finally, is MPT dead?
It's a lot. You guys, that was a very effective 30 seconds. So right here, Jacqueline.
I'm Jackie O'Neill with Inclusive Security. I want to talk about the strategy related to negotiations with North Korea and the fact that the majority of all engagement has been predicated on progress on the nuclear issue first. And with any other negotiation, you don't take the tanglement of issues and focus only on the single biggest, hardest issue and keep tightening and tightening that knot. You work on issues around it as well and softening that. So I'm wondering if you have what your insights would be on broadening the set of issues that we're dealing with in North Korea to include reconciliation, peace agreement, territorial disputes, humanitarian reconciliation, or humanitarian assistance.
More than we have time for, but it's a great list. Shout out to Michael Austin here.
Sorry, it is a question about broadening, not just the actors, but the issues so that nuclear doesn't become the only and entirety of our focus of negotiation.
And I don't know if Michael Austin's here, but he wrote a great piece in The Atlantic to add on to what Jackie just said, which is perhaps we should actually be offering North Korea to help them secure and keep safe the warheads they have. It was a very provocative thing for a guy from AEI to write, but I just want to give him credit for it because it's very interesting. Stanislav.
Sławomir Dębski, Director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. I have the following question. From the conventional point of view, North Korea, Europe, Middle East, they are separate theater of operations. But from the strategic point of view, from the point of view of nuclear deterrence, they are interlinked. How we should adapt first our thinking, then our strategic and defense posture to the situation that something goes wrong in North Korea?
Thank you. And then this gentleman right here. We have a mic over here. Just toss it to him.
Yeah. Chad O'Carroll, Managing Director of NK News. My question is to General Hyten. The US has been able to live with a nuclear ICBM-capable China and Russia for many years. Can it do the same with North Korea?
Great. So I'm going to pause there because we're in this, and we've got a question on can we live with a nuclear-tipped ICBM capability? Should we broaden the sets of issues that we should be discussing, which Jackie just raised? How are our set of communications between the different players? Is NPT dead? And frankly, finally, what Dov Zakheim posed is what more can we be doing with China that we aren't already doing to get a strategic alignment around North Korea? So let me start with you, Dr. Kim.
I think so-called the secondary boycott should be expanded and should be implemented in a comprehensive manner by the United States. The UN Security Council is likely to be blocked by key players like China and Russia. In order for us to move China further to solve this problem, I think many of third entities who are trading with North Korean government and North Korean national companies should be on the spot so that they have to be prevented from what they have been doing. Otherwise, we cannot focus on the real targets. Then I think China will begin to move. Trump administration has taken some measures closer to the real secondary boycott, but my suggestion is to implement this sanctions in a more comprehensive manner.
Thank you. Bonnie, 1 minute.
I think I just would pick up on the point about other subject matters.
Broadening the field.
Broadening the field. I think a number of people, as you have mentioned, have written on how a discussion with North Korea should include other issues like biological weapons or even human rights or some of these other things. That's an issue. But also, I mean, if you, not to always refer to the Iran agreement, but that's the kind of the one I'm looking at right now. There are other things in the Iran agreement that, of course, takes advantage of the fact that countries wanted to do business with Iran, but also, things setting up working groups with them, looking at issues of nuclear security. There were other things in that agreement that was trying, that the goal is to set up a dialogue on other issues that could hopefully strengthen the relationships. Now, whether that'll work or not, it was trying to look at it more holistically and how we can fix the situation by looking at other issues.
General?
So the answer to the question, can we live with a nuclear North Korea? The answer is yes, but the question we have to ask ourselves, do we want to live in that world? Is a world without a nuclear North Korea a better world than a world with a nuclear North Korea? That's what we have. We can live in any world that presents itself. We can figure out how to defend ourselves against that world. But what world do we want to live in? That's what we need to work to with our allies. And then the question about relationships with our adversaries. We have still good communications in emergencies with Russia. We're working on improved communications with the other elements of our adversaries, China in particular. We've had good visits recently at the senior level. I continue to advocate for more mill-to-mill relationships between the military leadership of the United States, not only with our allies like we have here, but also with our adversaries. And I don't think we do enough of that with our adversaries. And there's a lot of reasons for that I won't go into, but we need to do more of it.
Moshe?
We have to admit that the policy exercise toward North Korea is a failure. We have already a military nuclear North Korea, and we have to learn the lessons of history. The Iranian regime, as an example, is using this as a lesson of history. In order to prevent another military nuclear rogue regime like in Iran, we have to demonstrate determination. Just as an example, without exercising military option, after Operation Iraqi Freedom 2003, Muammar Gaddafi gave up his military nuclear project without a single shot. And Khamenei decided to suspend it. Why? Because they realized that it might be targeted on the third phase of the American offensive. Afghanistan, the first one, Iraq, the second one. The main question among rogue leaders in our region was who might be targeted next. So, and of course, a combination of political isolation, crippling economic sanctions, credible military option, those elements should be exercised on such regimes before going to the military option itself. Never mind, you might reach this kind of strategic posture by certain even minor activities, especially on behalf of the United States, in the Middle East, and elsewhere. I have a lot of examples which actually weakened the American posture in the Middle East because of a decision not to go and to hit Syria after using the chemical weapons and other examples. So my bottom line, we still need global policemen. Going back to what we talked yesterday, the international world order. The only one to keep it is the United States. So let's have America credible again.
I want to thank all of you. I'm very, very sorry that we weren't able to get to more questions. I want to compliment the Halifax Forum to having this subject and just share two vignettes as we close, and thank all of you for this. Is while you were making a comment about the music over this, where I was joking about Dr. Strangelove, and say there is a kind of humor that one can recklessly bring to this subject, but it's a very, very sobering, serious subject. And I went back and looked at the first nuclear briefing that Bill Clinton got on inauguration morning at 7 a.m. in 1993, and an observer said they had never seen him more silent and more sober than ever after that meeting. Scowcroft apparently left that meeting to walk back to the Blair House with tears just rimming around his eyes in terms of the seriousness of that issue. Tony Blair warned at one point the pressures of nuclear command, which you're part of, are staggering and require enormous composure, judgment, restraint, and diplomatic skill. And so while we may see flamboyance out there, that fundamentally in the structure of this are very, very important life and death decisions for millions of people. So I want to thank you so much, Moshe Yaalon, John Hyten, Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, and Songhan Kim. Thank you both very much, all very much. Thank you.